Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Guy Ritchie's King Arthur, Legend of the Sword in 2017. So here we are with another Guy Ritchie film review, and yes, the fifth review that I'll be doing on this channel, from Guy Ritchie, and be doing all of his films, of course, at some point, including Lock, Stock, which I do now, own on Blu-ray. And yes, this is an interesting film to say the least. Very, very critically panned. Did disgracefully at the box office, really. All things considered, and there was planned sequels, many sequels, but they were cancelled. I've not really looked too much into that, but yes, basically it did not do well. There is a fan base though, out there. A 6.8 on IMDb is not a low score. It's average, ever so slightly below average, on IMDb, and it's hard to decide on that site now what means what, because everything's going down. But yeah, not weak on that. There is a lot of YouTube reviews that I've seen that basically have praised it and say it's not as bad as the critics make out, and it's just general people just saying it's not as bad. Now I love Guy Ritchie when he's on form. Lock, Stock I loved. When I saw it quite a few years ago, Lost time saw it. Snatch is one of my favourite films of all time. A Game of Shadows, the second Sherlock Holmes, I loved, and the first one is very, very, whether I like it or dislike it, was very, very close. I didn't care for it too much. The Man from U.N.C.L.E., as I said before, is a weak film. Now, I didn't expect too much, of course, going into this. I didn't actually expect it to be quite as bad as the critics made out. I did actually see a clip before this watch. And it's basically, in the second half of the film, some of the action. I watched it for about 5 minutes actually, just to kind of, not properly paying attention, but just to see what it, if it was actually horrendous or anything. From what I saw, it wasn't. And actually, that was one of the best scenes in the film. Now, do I think this is as bad as some say? As the critics have said. Overall, I don't agree with the 30% on Rotten Tomatoes, around about that score. But unfortunately, not far off. And I wouldn't quite. I'm not going to say it's going to be one of the worst films of that year, 10 worst. But overall, considering, so I love, and this is basically, I'm not going to say any of the plot really, other than it's basically Guy Ritchie's take on King Arthur, the legends of King Arthur, the Arthurian legends. It's fantasy kind of mythology and everything there, and basically, it's a historical film and fantasy and an action adventure, and yeah, basically as well, kind of at times here and there, Guy Ritchie's kind of style, trademark humour in the film, but really, I do say at times, and that is really just blemishes here and there. That's one of the unfortunate things, but we'll get to that. Now, I love fantasy films when they're done well. The big obvious one, it's one of my, well, it's in my top 10. I'm not going to say how far it is up in the top 10, but very obvious fantasy films, some of my absolute 10 favourite films. Then we've got another franchise, Harry Potter, I absolutely love, that's kind of in that vein. Adore the franchise. Again, when I review them, you'll find out how much I adore them. So many great films of fantasy. I grew up watching a lot of fantasy films, and just period films, historical films. These kind of gladiator films as well. And things like A Never-Ending Story. So it's not like I'm not a fan of the genre. It's just this film didn't quite do it for me. Actually, at times it was quite painful. It's a real unfortunate case because I just don't see what Guy Ritchie, is kind of doing anymore. It's a real unfortunate sight. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and this now I can call weak films. I don't think they're bad. I don't think they're awful. And yeah, I suppose if you ask me, are they quite as, is this film quite as bad as overall it's critically received as? Maybe not quite, but I can understand. As I say, not far off for me. Just very, very underwhelming as well, not in terms of the genre and everything and all the potential this film had, but Guy Ritchie, what another disappointment, really. Rock and Roller just was average, and the first Sherlock Holmes, this and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. have all been underwhelming. It's a real shame, because I think, Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows, I think was a great film. That was not really his gangster stuff, but really I think overall he's best when he stays in the vein of Lock, Stock and Snatch. They're easily, at the moment, by far his best films for me. And I just don't see him going back to this kind of stuff. Kind of low-key, but not really low-key, you know what I mean? Gangster films, crime films. With the humour, with the characters, that classic British humour that he's so good at, getting across. The camera work, the kinetic camera work, just consistent, within the tone of the film and the characters and the time period. This is not. This is obviously a historical film and fantasy film as well. Now, there's many moments where his style comes through and it doesn't quite work. But again, throughout this film, I didn't quite see fully his commitment with his style, and the tone, and what he was basically glimmers coming through what he wanted to do maybe with the film, and because they were so watered down, they just didn't go anywhere. And maybe if he'd fully committed to this, it would have worked better. But once again, I think actually, in the vein of this kind of film, what he's going for, the way that it is at times really taken seriously, it's almost like a Shakespeare film, in the manner it's dealt. A lot of the subject matter and just some of the acting and everything. And then you've got the mix between that and the kind of the humour that he used in Snatch and Lock, Stock. A lot of things just don't work in this film. I can't really pinpoint lots of the time what would have been better. If he had just stuck with his classic kind of style, or just done away with it altogether. But it's kind of a mix of both that doesn't really work too well at all, and it really just doesn't. This film just doesn't really amount to much at all. I think it's a weak film. Now, of course, Charlie Hunnam, for me, very bland in this film, and his kind of character, the performance, of course plays King Arthur, the protagonist, just does not match. First of all, at the same time, simultaneously, it does not match this whole kind of period, and just as well the kind of the actual way it's kind of it's meant to be the legends of old and stuff, as well as Guy Ritchie's at times style. I just think he's not got the energy for the Guy Ritchie stuff, and he's not got the kind of the restraint and the kind of just the kind of presence, or anything for this kind of Shakespearean kind of stuff. This kind of historical film. It's just a real shame it just doesn't work on any level really. There's a couple moments where he has a couple of quips that aren't bad, and as well he does show some emotion. When you see the flashbacks and stuff. Which is a lot throughout the film. Now, basically, Bana plays the father, and his brother, who's obviously King Arthur's uncle, is one of the kings, and basically he overtakes. You see in the flashbacks at the beginning, the kind of prologue, he kind of betrays him, and then basically it's played by Jude, and basically King Arthur throughout the film is basically trying to regain the throne and everything, and then of course power to the sword, and it's apparently rightfully his. Now, the actual sword itself, I think, at times it's quite good the way it's done, when he's picking it up early on. Actually, one of the highlights is the David Beckham scene. I don't quite get the hate for that. Yes, it's David Beckham and his accent's not, it's a bit off-putting and everything, considering what this film is and everything. But it's quite funny, and it wasn't bad. It's actually one of the highlights of the film, and a bit where, of course, King Arthur takes the sword one of the first times. Now, that was quite good, but as the film goes on, I think the way that they dealt, the kind of mystery and everything, and the kind of thing they were doing with the sword, just didn't work for me. As well, it just the final fights in the film are just completely CGI'd. Just everything in this film is just disgraceful. Of course, that's obviously they wanted to be ambitious with the swordplay, because it's it's meant to be this kind of fantastical weapon. You know, it's got all powers from it and everything. You kind of slow down time, you could say, and you know, as well, that kind of gives way to the editing style that really is another form of Guy Ritchie editing style. It's not anything close to the Snatch or Lock Stock. It's like a weird take on his editing in this film, and that comes later on in the film. So really, that gets worse and worse. The kind of lore and everything, you know, and the kind of legends, the kind of mythology of it all gets worse. It started off quite good actually. I think the prologue was good. I do. I think at this point I was thinking, actually, you know, this is probably going to be quite a good film, and yeah, it's probably going to be a film I like. Unfortunately, the film gets, you know, mostly worse. It does pick up again in little bits in the second half, but generally as well, the final act is very disappointing, and it's kind of a generic ending. I don't think it's a bad film, but I do think, you know, it is a weak film, and the storytelling is not strong at all. The characters as well, the side characters, I just think, you know, it's not great writing in this film. Performances aren't good at all. I just don't care for the characters really at all in this film. Jude Law now. Jude Law is really an actor who he's never really given a performance where, you know, I've loved. I think he was fine in The Game of Shadows, but I'm being honest, everything I've seen him in, apart from that, I've not connected to his performance, and that's put it nicely. I'm not going to say any more, but really, you know, I'm not a fan, and in this film, maybe the worst I've seen of him, and just this uncle, this character, this king, is not good, really at all. The writing, it's pretty pathetic, and it's just over the top and also bland at the same time. You know, it's one of them. You know, a lot of the fantasy elements in this film, just when they're in there, just seem out of place. I just don't think they're handled well. It's just the type of fantasy, you know, when it's done in a way where it's just not believable. You know, and fantasy doesn't have to be like that. You know, it's been proven quite a few times now. You know, in cinema, it doesn't have to be the case. It doesn't have to be Willow. You know, it doesn't have to be. You know, films like this, just films that aren't believable and just stupid, dumb. Something that you can't relate to. And this film, you know, a lot of the fantasy elements are like that. At other times, you know, it does work fairly well. The prologue was really good. You know, I think it was. The strengths of the film really lie in that. Summed up with that, you know, the kind of mythology and everything. You know, the kind of the atmosphere. You know, the kind of dark fantasy that it was going for, and you know, these massive elephants are in this film. The action really at its best here, and just the scope of it, but also you know, it does go for some human kind of storylines, and you know, setting up kind of a tragedy, and you know, like a kind of revenge story, and you know, it's kind of the poetics of it all, but also, you know, at times being kind of, you know, just kind of Guy Ritchie take. Now the rest of the film is nowhere close to this really consistently. You know, you've got some moments early on with Charlie Hunnam, you know, as King Arthur. The montage sequences, which are quite good at times, and you know, they do have quite a lot of. There is some wit in there, you know, and it's kind of it does work to an extent, but the rest of the film just starts to dip really. It starts to sag, and it just becomes quite boring. I will say, quite lifeless, and the humour for the rest of the film just doesn't quite land. At times, it is quite off-putting, you know, and it just doesn't work. Once, you know, more and more characters come into the film, it just loses sense of the narrative really, and there wasn't really a strong narrative to begin with, but it was there, you know, and the prologue set things up nicely. They flash back to some of the Eric Bana things, you know, of course he died in the prologue, and you know, some of the stuff they went for there fitted fairly well. There are some things to merit, you know, there's kind of humanity in there, but really, for the most part, it's overdone, and it loses any sort of meaningful, you know, feel really, and just, yeah, it's kind of just repetitive, and yeah, that's not great either. Eric Bana again is bland in the film. Yeah, you know, just Jude Law, a really awful villain, really awful villain. And yeah, you've just got a film that really, it's not bad, it's not awful. You know, at times it would have been average for me, maybe good at the beginning, but it just falls short on so many aspects, and it is a film that's got a weak narrative overall from start to finish. I think the visuals at times are good. In the second half of the film, not good. Really, really dark in a bad way, and the CGI that comes into play now, shocking stuff. That's that one of them fights near the end where King Arthur is waving his sword around, and it's kind of like this 300. That film. The way that so many films have copied that kind of, where it's slow mo, fast mo. There's kind of like the way the camera moves and zooms in and everything. And you've got the sound. It goes, it comes live again, and it gets muted. And, that's what it does here, but it's a really, really bad version of that. And yes, it's just an awful scene, atrocious, that scene of action. Wow, the CGI, how did someone look at this film? And Guy Ritchie, of course, he began with these practical films that were just gritty, kind of realistic, kind of gangster films. And he's gone to this. How did people look at this and think us as viewers would actually believe in what we're seeing? Because it looks absolutely atrocious. I don't hate on CGI overall. I'm not a person who dismisses all films with CGI. And I'm actually a person who really defends Marvel, the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all these kind of films. And I think CGI, when done well, is just another extension, for a filmmaker to explore different things, to expand things visually, that couldn't quite be achieved in the way that practical just. And a great mix of practical and CGI it makes for a great film. It can be great visually. But really, I can understand when people get annoyed at CGI in films because really just look at maybe the 70s before that. Filmmakers just looking at this sort of film now and just thinking, what are they playing at? It just really is quite shocking, and I can understand. It's just how did it ever happen? How did ever people use CGI like this and think they can get away with it? And make us believe what's happening. Because it's just disgusting. It actually gives you the effect. Just the effect that, wow, what I'm watching here is just really, it's weird, because it's just so fake, and very, very annoying, frustrating stuff there, because this didn't really crop up too much in the first half, but the second half of the film is ridden with, CGI, and it's not done well. Really, really, it's just strange how more and more years we go on from, the 90s, the 2000s, when CGI really came into play. It's gone worse. How's that happened? And I think it's just the way that filmmakers are using it. They don't quite know what they're doing. That's what it is. It's just, and it's not. It's just abused. I think CGI at times. In this case, where there's not a mix of that and practical. It's basically all just green screen CGI mess, and it's not concealed, and it's just not good CGI. And that's it. That's all I'll say there. The action actually, the first half was good. I think it was, it's solid. The second half let itself down. The first prologue, I think, was really good action. And yes, it had some CGI in there, but it wasn't, with the normal fight scenes, which didn't have to be. And yes, overall, I think this film is a mess. It's not got a great narrative at all. The characters really that I cared for at all. Aidan Gillen is in the film. He basically plays Littlefinger, in this film. And yeah, it's just kind of weird. And just the rest of the characters I didn't really care for. King Arthur was not an awful character, but he is quite bland and forgettable as a protagonist, and just someone who doesn't quite fit the tone of the film, the many tones of the film, because it's just kind of all over the place at times. But it has got some visuals to praise. I think some of the cinematography is good. It has got some humour that works. Kind of early on, where Guy Ritchie was going for this kind of the Guy Ritchie humour. It kind of came through a little bit. It came through the cracks, and it was there, and it was there to merit. And yes, I just think some of the action, of course, throughout the film is good. Visually, is good at times, and it does have some emotion, definitely, in the story. Humanity. It's a really good scene involving one of the kids and their father. You know, and actually a scene where Jude Law is involved. That wasn't bad. So overall, it is just a weak film from me. So overall, I think I'd have to give this film a 47%. Now, that's basically a percentage more than what I gave The Man from U.N.C.L.E., I believe. So they're pretty much on the same level. I don't like either of them. I think they're weak films, really, really underwhelming. Both of them, they're not bad. And, you know, there's some things that work, you know, in terms of the humour in this film. You know, the first half is definitely better than the second half, you know, overall. And yeah, I just didn't care too much at all for the second half of the film. There is some things to merit in terms of you know, humanity in the film. Some moments that are here and there. Some of the action in the first half definitely good. And overall, visually, you know, this film is not awful. You know, it has got its moments that are quite good actually. And yes, it's not quite a bad film overall. You know, I'm not going to say any more. 47% is not high. It's a shame, you know. I think it's not far off what the critics are, you know, are saying. You know, not one of the worst films of the year. I don't think will be. Not one of the, you know, worst films of all time. I don't quite see how it flopped at the box office, really. But you know, it's not a good film, and you know, I just don't see. I think, of course, you know, he's going to be doing a new Sherlock Holmes film, which I look forward to the potential. But at the moment, I just don't see what Guy Ritchie is kind of doing. You know, I really think he should just come back to what he was great at, and it's a shame. But you know, I can't explain it. It's not working. It's just really underwhelming films. And yes, that's it. That's all I have to say. Another disappointment. Very, very sad to see this happen once again. But yes, maybe one day he'll come back and you know, to what he was great at, and deliver us some more truly great films. And you know, Sherlock Holmes: The Game of Shadows was really good actually. It was great for me. I loved the film, but the first one wasn't great. And just overall, his career, you know, has really taken dips. And it's just, yeah, it's very disappointing. As an actual really a fan of Guy Ritchie's early work, a massive fan, and you know, overall of his style, what he can do, it's a shame. But there we have it. I wouldn't agree with that. You know, one of the worst films of the year. You know, anything like that. You know, once I see all the films, I'm sure there's a lot worse out there. But yeah, you know, I think actually a very, very famous film of that year was a lot worse than this. Another blockbuster that was very well received critically, but very, very divisive with fans. I'm one of them. I've showed it in my collection. You'll probably know what the film is. But this is better than that. So yeah, there are worse films out there. But yes, that's my review. And yeah, thanks for watching my review of Guy Ritchie's King Arthur: Legend of the Sword.